Can you recall all the colors that just passed on the slide? To accomplish this, you would have to use your memory, the topic of discussion for today's presentation. Hi, I'm Adia, and I'm here today with Jessica, and we'll be discussing Unit 5, Memory.
So what exactly is memory? How do you explain it from a scientific perspective? By psychological definition, memory is the persistence of learning over time through the encoding, storage, and retrieval of information.
Did you know that memory can be split into multiple categories? Before we dive deeper into memory and its parts, let's first talk about the different types of memory. In the field of psychology, memory can be broken down into sensory, working, long-term, and flashbulb memory. Let's elaborate on this.
Sensory memory is a brief precursor to short-term memory that allows you to process and recall the sensations you take in. The key associations with sensory memory is that it is very brief and immediate.
Let's start with sensory memory. Sensory memory can be broken down further into two parts, iconic and echoic memory. Essentially, while iconic memory is the momentary sensory memory of visual stimuli, echoic memory is the momentary sensory memory of auditory stimuli.
Before we continue on to the other types of memory, I'll give a few examples of both iconic and echoic memory to help consolidate what was just discussed. Let's examine you glance over at a friend's phone as they are scrolling through their Facebook newsfeed. You spot something as she quickly thumbs past it, but you can close your eyes and visualize an image of the item very briefly. Furthermore, imagine you wake up at night to get a drink of water and turn the kitchen light on. Almost instantly, the bulb burns out and leaves you in darkness, but you can briefly envision what the room looked like from the glimpse you were able to get. These are all illustrations of iconic memory.
Echoic memory is common in our everyday lives. Spoken language is a great example of echoic memory. When someone talks, your echoic memory retains each individual syllable. Your brain recognizes words by connecting each syllable to the previous one. Each word is also stored in echoic memory, which allows your brain to understand a full sentence. Furthermore, your brain also uses echoic memory when you listen to music. It briefly recalls the previous note and connects it to the next one. As a result, your brain recognizes the notes as a song.
After sensory memory, we now have working memory, or sometimes referred to as short-term memory. Working memory contains a limited capacity that can hold information temporarily. To gain or take in new information, attention and focus are of utmost importance. Furthermore, an interesting fact is the magic number 7 theory. The theory provides evidence for the capacity of short-term memory. Essentially, most adults can store between 5 and 9 items in their short-term memory.
In contrast to short-term memory, long-term memory refers to the storage of information over an extended period of time, where memories often are permanent.
Flashbulb memory is the highly detailed, exceptionally vivid snapshot of the moment and circumstances in which a surprising and consequential event took place. The amygdala, a part of the temporal lobe in the brain which produces a conscious perception of emotion, causing intense emotions such as aggression and fear, contributes significantly to flashbulb memory. For example, people who experienced the 1989 San Francisco earthquake had a perfect recall, years later, of where they had been and what they were doing. Others' memories for the circumstances under which they merely heard about the quake were more prone to errors.
Let's move on to the work of a famous psychologist in the field, specifically George Miller. George Miller was a psychologist who is known for being one of the founders of cognitive psychology. Perhaps one of his most popular contributions to the field was his information processing theory.
The information processing model is a framework used by cognitive psychologists to explain and describe mental processes. Essentially, our brains are like computers. As information is received by a computer, it is processed in the central processing unit, which is equivalent to the human part of the mind where information is temporarily held so that it may be used, discarded, or transferred into long-term memory.
According to the information processing theory, there are three processes to memory: encoding, storage, and retrieval.
Memory encoding is the initial learning of information. It is how the information coming from sensory input is changed into a form so that it can be stored in the brain. The things we can encode include visuals, like images, acoustics, like sounds and words, and semantic, words and their meanings.
This method of getting information into our memory system can be done with the help of automatic processing. Automatic processing essentially is the unconscious encoding of incidental information, such as space, time, and frequency, and of well-learned information, such as the meaning of words.
In the next few slides, to explain and demonstrate each concept, we will provide real-world examples. First, here's an example for space. While studying, you may often encode the place on a paper or in your notebook where certain material appears. Later, when you want to retrieve the information, you may visualize its location.
Regarding time, it explains how, while going about your day, you may unintentionally note the sequence of its events. For example, let's say you forgot your backpack and realize that you've left your backpack somewhere else. The event sequence your brain automatically encoded will enable you to trace your steps back and find the backpack.
Have you ever effortlessly kept track of how many times things happen? Maybe you realize, this is the third time I ran into it today. This phenomenon is explained through the frequency component of the automatic process.
In contrast to the unconscious nature of automatic processing, effortful processing, which is another encoding process, encodes through consciousness and awareness. From the involvement of the hippocampus and frontal lobe, this retention of facts and experiences is much more explicit.
After encoding messages, our brain starts to store it. And a little fun fact, the capacity for storing long-term memories is essentially limitless. A common misconception is that we store our memories in precise locations. However, the opposite stands true. Many parts of the brain interact as we encode, store, and retrieve the information. Some may wonder exactly how our memory works, and that can be explained from the long-term potentiation model, where it is believed to be a neural basis for learning and memory. Essentially, there is an increase in a cell's firing potential after brief, rapid stimulation, where sending neurons need less prompting to release its neurotransmitters, and more connections exist between neurons.
The last part of the information processing model is retrieval. Since memories are held in storage by a web of associations, each piece of information is interconnected. There are many ways to retrieve your memories, but for this lesson, we'll only discuss a few of them. First, there's recall and recognition. Although these words are often confused, they are two entirely different things. Recall is retrieving information that is not currently in your conscious awareness, but that was once learned at an earlier time. On the other hand, recognition is identifying items previously learned. Next, we have retrieval cues, a prompt or stimuli that helps us retrieve information from our long-term memories. And lastly, we have relearning, which is pretty self-explanatory. We learn something much faster when we learn it a second or third time. For example, when you study for a final exam or engage in a language that you used in early childhood, you will relearn the material much easier than you did initially.
We might have all dealt with forgetfulness, big or small. However, unlike forgetting to pack your lunch for school or doing your homework, amnesia is one form of memory loss that is both dramatic and extreme. Another misconception is not knowing the difference between anterograde and retrograde amnesia. Basically, anterograde amnesia is having difficulty creating new memories, whereas retrograde amnesia is not being able to retrieve old memories.
Since we've just finished discussing memory, we hope that you are still able to remember or recall the information that was just taught. No worries, if you've forgotten any concepts, this video, along with other unit videos, will still be up on our YouTube channel. If you enjoyed watching this video, please consider subscribing for future content and even following us on Instagram. As representatives of the Northview Psi Alpha team, we thank you all for watching. Have a nice day.